Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I am so excited for this episode. Just a little bit ago, I was in North Carolina. I had an awesome opportunity to tour the EOC and the airport perspective with Michael Tobin out there. So he's going to be talking a little bit about his background. But I want to give some context to people. Let's see. Oh, this is a long time ago for me. 2009, I think it was. I went to a PIO conference. I was in my undergrad. I went to a PIO conference via the idea of one of my professors, and I heard all about these different experiences from the PIO perspective. And there was a lot of emergency managers in that room, and one of the ones that really stood out to me was the Reno air show disaster. And they walked through the complexity of what happened. So essentially, for everybody else's understanding, an elderly gentleman had a heart attack. Plane uh, Something happened in the plane. He was able to regain himself, but the by that point the problem in the plane had happened. I think it was like an engine failure or something, which caused his heart attack, which caused a bunch of other stuff. But it ended up hitting the crowd, and right before he hit the crowd, he was able to maneuver just enough to be able to not hit the middle of the crowd, but it hit right in front, and so the debris went right into the crowd. And they were talking about the complexities of air shows. They were talking about the complexities of emergency management and aviation and all these different things coming together. And in 2009, it was kind of like a newer concept. Well, you fast forward to 2024, and then you get like all stars like Michael Tobin, who just understand the unique complexities of aviation with airports and emergency management and all the different components, the federal agencies involved, the locals involved. You know, the fact that there's multiple airlines trying to operate, and quite frankly, it's really fascinating to hear from his perspective. And so I really was hoping that he would come on the show and talk to us about that perspective, and to be able to understand these unique concepts that he has to deal with on a daily basis, and hopefully to be able to help you out too. So with that, I just want to say, Michael, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you. It's great to be here.
So you have a huge airport. In fact, every time I feel like I'm going to your airport, I feel like it's doubled in size. I don't know if that's just like my perception or what, but it's just massively growing over the last 7 years. Is that true?
It is very much so. You know, we're in the middle of a large building project with a new terminal, new baggage claim, new front of house, and it's just becoming larger and larger every day. Every day that I go to the terminal, there's a new wall or a new corridor. So it's something that, at least from the EM perspective, we got to keep an eye on, because it's vastly changing every day. And hopefully within towards the end of 2025, will be end of that particular construction project, and we'll get back to some normalcy here at CLT.
Being the emergency manager, is it exciting that things are always changing, or do you just wish that you had more consistency? Where do you fall within that?
I like to change. There is always something new and different. There is a saying that's been told to me multiple times since I've been in this role, that if you've been to one airport, you've been to one airport. So, in theory, the concept is, the airport, people know how to navigate an airport, but airports are so different one from another that just because you go to Atlanta or to Charlotte or DFW, Seattle, whatever, they are all very uniquely different. The concepts are the same, but once you get into the heart of the airport, they are all very, very different in how they operate.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at l3harris.com right now. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today.
CBRNE Convergence, the world's largest conference for the non-conventional threat, is heading back to Orlando between October 28th and 30th, 2024, with 3 days of workshops, lectures, and interactive sessions delivered by speakers from around the world on the latest issues and approaches to CBRNE and hazmat. Make sure to claim your early bird discount by registering now at cbrneworld.com/event/Orlando.
Yeah, I always think about which airport. There's one airport in particular. I feel like I had to take 15 different trains to get to my right terminal, and I wonder from the complexity standpoint of how they ensure safety in that process. One, you have to get in, so there's a safety element there. But oh gosh, what airport is that? They have an earthquake issue too, and all their stuff is underground. I'll have to think about it, but I do wonder from, you have the safety component of the man-made threats or the human caused threats, but then you just have like natural disasters. North Carolina, huge airport, you're by the ocean, you get events all the time. You had a tower that was just on fire that you guys are taking down. Thankfully, it wasn't that big of a deal. Um, Walk us through kind of the different things that you have to deal with in your airport, being where it's located and all the things that you have to deal with.
Absolutely. So, Charlotte is unique. We're a couple hours from the mountains and a couple hours from the coast. So we're right in the middle. And so we have to have at least be aware of, whatever hurricane threats there are. We do have tornadoes. We do have winter storms. So we get a little mixed bag of everything, which is, from an emergency manager's perspective, good. So we can plan for a lot of different things and have those plans and exercise those plans, which is always fun to do. But it's unique. Anything that can happen in any jurisdiction, whether it's a city, a county, or even a state, it can happen at an airport, and it does. For us, and you just mentioned it, within a week's time, literally 7 days, we had an issue with our baggage handling system. We had a sewage spill, and we had our old FAA tower catch on fire. So within 7 days, those three different events happened that all required a emergency management response to some level to mitigate or work with those agencies that responded to it. So every day is very, very different. The threat is always ever changing, but it's certainly a unique and rewarding atmosphere to work in.
Yeah, let's back up, like way back up, because I was starting to get ahead of myself. I'm really excited to talk about Charlotte Airport, of course, but you in particular, when we went there, and shout out to Denny who was able to go with me and be able to hear from your perspective and all the different things that you're working with, and kind of where you're at in your stage. How did you get there? Can you walk through for our audience like the kind of the big steps of director of emergency management for Charlotte Airport? That's such a unique path to follow.
Absolutely. So it unique, at least for me and in my circumstances. Prior to coming to the airport, I was with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Emergency Management Office, which is a division of the Charlotte Fire Department. Was with them for 14 years. Started out as a 911 telecommunicator and then moved over to emergency management and spent 10 years in EM at the local government level, which was fantastic. Loved it, had no intentions of leaving. But I got an interesting call one day from the director of airport operations at the time and said that we're looking to start an emergency management program here at the airport, and we want your help and your assistance. I said, great, happy to do it. What do you need from me? And he says, help us write the job description. What are the things that you would look for in a person to do that? So we worked on that over the course of a couple of months. Didn't hear from him for a while, figured it was a dead issue. And then one day he called and said, hey, we got the permission. We're moving forward with the program. Just wanted to let you know. I said, great, let me know how I can help, be involved in it, whether it's on the interview panel or whatever the case may be. And he says, no, you don't understand. He says, I want you to apply for it. And that was kind of an aha moment, if you will. And ironically, the moment that he called, I just got on a cruise ship with my family, and we were in Port Canaveral. So we were ready to go out to sea, and all of a sudden I get this phone call, and it totally changed my whole perspective and mindset of being on vacation to having multiple days of conversation with my wife, saying, do we want to go down this path? This is something totally new and different. And long story short, I applied, was accepted for the position, fortunately. But for me, it was unique and different in that They did not have anybody in the position prior to that. So this was a new program that was being built. And not too often in one's career, you get to literally build an emergency management program from the ground up. Usually somebody will go in to an existing program, they'll change it, make it their own, which is great. But it's very rare that you get to build a program from nothing to something. Or at least I'm not at the something yet. I'm still working towards it. But it was that unique opportunity, and I was at a good point in my career where I wanted to make the change. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to move. I went from leaving the fire department on a Friday afternoon and went to the airport on Monday morning and never skipped a beat. I've been with the city of Charlotte for over 20 years now. So it's been very rewarding and very fortunate.
I love that story. I wouldn't say it mirrors my own, but there's elements of my own too. For the audience sake, so many times I hear from people, especially in their younger in their career, like nobody's noticing all the effort I'm putting in. Nobody's noticing all the effort putting in. However, you're a perfect example of somebody who's doing things right just for the sake of doing it right. You were asked to help out, and so you created the position description just wanting to be the good guy in the room, and all of a sudden it turned into a job opportunity, and, that just shows your level of character, and I hope that those who are listening who think that nobody's noticing, somebody always notices. And it might not be your boss, you might not be able to get the recognition that you're looking to get for, but most literally, it could be somebody adjacent to you who, down the road say, "Hey, let's hire you." Right? I think you're a perfect example of that, and I'm not saying you weren't getting credit at your last job. I'm just saying you were noticed, right? Which is
Very
pretty
much so.
awesome.
And it's interesting you say that. So when I started my career, I was in my late 20s within public safety, and I was the new kid on the block, and we would go all these meetings with different counties and throughout the state of North Carolina, and you just observe and you watch and you learn, and the old guard is there, people who've been in the roles 20, 30 years, and you never think that you're going to get to that position or to that role. And then all of a sudden you look back and you're like, well, now people are calling me for advice, or they want to do tours of our facility. Or so, I think I've transitioned in my career from, that young go-getter to a little bit more that elder statesman, if you will, in that role, which I'm happy to fulfill. Certainly I would, love to go back 10 or 15 years in age, but that is what it is. But it's that passing of the torch, if you will. And, I take that responsibility very seriously, in that if people are looking for opportunities or just advice, somebody did it for me. Actually, multiple people did it for me throughout my career. So I want to be able to pass that torch on to others and, give them some guidance and direction and where I've been and how I've gotten there. And that's just, I think, the nature of the EM business. You're always wanting to help somebody out. And if somebody can make a career out of it and be able to, support their lifestyle and their family and what they want to do, then I think that's a win right there.
That was like the mic drop moment. We could probably just end the podcast right there, honestly. But yeah, we get how do I say this? We get a lot of emails from people who love the advice from our guests and ask me for advice, and I'm like, I don't think you get it. I'm just interviewing the other cool person in the room. And I get to kind of ride the coattails of people like you a little bit, but it's a strange dynamic, a paradigm shift when you're like, okay, like I'm the go-getter. I want to be tactical. I want to get into this. I want to learn everything I can. To all of a sudden, people are asking, "Hey, what do you think about this? Can I get your advice on that?" And I felt like I wouldn't say a fraud in the beginning, but I was just like, why are you asking me? And now that we're like, years into this, I'm about 20 years into this. Now I take it as a huge blessing and an opportunity to say, "Hey, let me walk through some of the things that either mistakes that I could have avoided, or even better, because of the podcast, say, look at like Michael Tobin. Like if you want an example of how to do something right, of how to get a new job, being a good person, here's somebody to point to." And so now I just try to point people towards different people that I've met along the way. From your perspective of somebody who wants to give back, you have so much to give, honestly. When I look at the airport perspective, it does mirror the field in a sense of it's kind of the wild, wild west sometimes. If you go to one airport, it's that airport. I see that on a lot of EM programs too. There's like really no standardization out there, and some people like that. Some people don't like that. I'm a fan of just trying to make sure the basics are got everywhere where I'm supposed to go. If somebody wants to get into aviation, especially somebody like you who has such a huge airport, what would be some of the things that you're like, okay, you got to make sure you do like X, Y, and Z here?
It's interesting. Coming into this role, having very good knowledge of emergency management at the local and local government level, and then put aviation on it. I knew a little bit about aviation, but not a whole lot. I was more of an outsider looking in. But once you get in here, there's a lot to learn. It's the regulations that we are bound by for the FAA, working with other federal partners like the TSA and the security issues and how does that work if we have to dump the terminal or dump the whole airport? That's going to be a huge impact for many, many hours, if not days, to recover from just because somebody may run through security or do something they shouldn't. So it's a lot of listening, and it's being that person in the back of the room and just watching how people interact with each other. Everything from our corporate airlines. We service 11 different airlines here at CLT. So each one is unique and certainly from their perspective. Our federal partners, like I mentioned, we're also a custom station with the CBP as well for international flights. So we have to look at that angle. And then there's all the stakeholders and the partners that help support the airport. We have 20,000 badge holders just at CLT. That's just the staff that work here on any given day, not to mention the passengers that are coming through the door. So it's very unique. It's very challenging at times. Certainly COVID was a little bit of a wrench in the works where our upward trajectory of passengers, took a nosedive with a lot of other airports and just the world in general. We're seeing a big rebound in that, and more people are even traveling now. And it's how do we accommodate the people that aren't used to traveling or new to traveling, and what does that mean from the emergency sense or the perspective of what we're trying to do so that we do have to evacuate, or we do have to put in some type of implementation of a program or something along those lines. How do we go about doing that? And it's very unique and it's very different from our perspective, because the end result is we want to keep the airport running. So when we have incidents, it's unique to an airport environment. We really have two incidents in one, in that we're dealing with the incident, XYZ, whatever that may be, but also how are we keeping the airport operational and functioning at the same time as the incident? We can't just close the airport. It's not like a shopping mall or anything along those lines where you can close it for the day, okay, and everybody comes back tomorrow and you rebuild or you go back to work. It's not that easy here at the airport because we're looking at many different airlines, tens of thousands, if not 100,000 people, that we have to accommodate in a given day. So there's some very unique challenges to that.
I think about working with stadiums once they came really like back online after COVID, and how crowds were much more rowdy. There was having a lot more, you know, um, essentially domestic violence issues between fans who knew each other and people who just want to break out in fights. Like they almost forgot how to interact socially. Did you find in your world with people starting to travel a lot more that that's the psychology of how to interact with the passenger changed?
Very much so. It's what their expectations are. Prior to COVID, Charlotte was a very heavy business traveler airport, if you will. Probably two-thirds to a third of the business travel to the regular family traveling for a vacation. And now that has switched. We're probably more two-thirds of what they call leisure travel now, which is a made-up word, but it makes sense. It's business and leisure kind of put together. And then the business traveler, your typical Monday through Friday traveler, has become less because of telework and everything that goes along with that. So the mindset has changed. People's experiences have changed. But very much of just what you just mentioned, the mentality overall is different. And we want to make sure that we can accommodate those people no matter what's happening in their personal life or at the airport. We want to make it as seamless and as effortless as possible. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way. But we're there to step in with obviously all of our partners to make that experience for the short time that they're with us the best that it can be.
For those who are listening, Michael is in a very nice collared shirt in his office, and I'm in a Readiness Lab T-shirt. So this is the perfect blend of bleisure. That's my new favorite made-up word. It's interesting how the airport dynamics, even of the passengers, shift when you have to deal with that shift. Is there messaging that changes, or is it more of like quiet changes, or are the changes very loud? Meaning, are they obvious changes, or do you just is it more of a training on the back end of how to deal with those passengers?
It's probably more training on the back end. I mean, I think the message will still remains the same of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to do and how we do it. Charlotte, as you know, is so widespread that we could have an incident in one concourse and it not impact any other part of the airport, and the airport is still operating. So, how do we direct that messaging specifically to those that are impacted in that terminal or on their way to that terminal? So, interestingly enough, about Charlotte is about 2/3, about 70% or so, are people that I like to call that never breathe Charlotte air. They're getting off of one plane and getting on another plane going to their destination. So roughly only about 30% of our daily population are people who are entering through the front door that either are coming from a hotel or coming from their home or whatever the case may be. They're getting on their flight and they're going somewhere else. So being such a transient population, we have to make sure that messaging is very specific to what we're trying to do without interrupting the entire operation as well.
Okay, so I'm trying not to like make a pitch for dynamic populations right now, but like you should totally come to one of these courses in the future. And even to speak at it, because a multilingual experience, people are in and out. If something, and it doesn't have to go boom, right? Like it could be a water main break, it could be a sewage. How do they interact with security personnel? How do they interact with other passengers, and how they deal with the panic in themselves? It's fascinating for me from the psychology of dealing with large crowds and crowd dynamics. The airport complexity is fascinating to me. I had somebody on here from the Atlanta International Airport, and they were telling me how there was a tornado on one tarmac, and they were still taking off planes on the other end because they needed to do it, and the FAA say go. From the perspective of people in different terminals may not understand what's happening in another terminal, are you able to do targeted messages to keep people basically unaware most as humanly possible? How do you deal with that? Does that make sense?
It does, and it's unique to us in that we're actually going through an implementation program right now, totally redoing our life safety program here at the airport, and doing more specific targeting of terminals and even gate areas of what that is. So you could be in a terminal and you could be at one end and it's impacting that end, whatever the incident may be. You may be 3 or 4 gates down and have no idea what something's going on just because of those dynamics and that specific messaging that we can get done. Excuse me. So it's an opportunity for us to leverage what we have just to make sure that people are doing what they need to be doing. And because most people, they just want to get on a plane and they just want to go. They just want to travel. They don't want to stay here any longer than they have to.
So just like in thinking about again those dynamics or the crowd dynamics at the airport, if you're talking about life-saving tactics and you're talking about I love the idea of targeted messaging. I personally, and this is going to be brutal to a lot of my friends out there, I don't think it's acceptable for us to do blanketed messages anymore. It doesn't help a lot of people out. If it doesn't impact somebody and they keep being bombarded with messages, then they stop paying attention. We have the capabilities now. I understand that comes with a cost, and we have to deal with real world. So we're going to put that aside for a second. But I live in an area of the country that gets tornadoes all the time, and here in St. Louis, and I can watch where the weather map is. And I've already called out my friends who live here, so they already know about this. But with a 3 and a 5-year-old, and we get the tornado siren at 1 a.m., and I'm watching the weather map, and that tornado's at the very bottom of my county, 100 miles away or whatever. I'm like, ooh, where's the targeted messaging here? Because we could do that. And I get nervous for people who've been in like hurricanes, for example, who have heard the message over and over and over again. It didn't impact their house. At an airport, the fact that you're even looking at even clusters of gates and how to avoid that even within the same terminal is really phenomenal. In the concept of that, how are you? This is going to sound kind of funny. How are you actually able to do that? Is it because you're expecting there's so many people to be around that the wall of people help that? Is it because of lights and sirens are able to be targeted certain areas? How are you able to target and not really make it a blanket message?
So it's really unique to the incident and how far out we need to reach. It's almost like creating that bubble around it to say, within this given segment, how many people do we need to reach? The challenge that we have is there's constant messaging in the airport all the time. New gate assignments. There's messaging that's standard with TSA. Make sure you're holding on to your belongings and things of that nature. And a lot of it's just white noise because people are so laser focused on, all right, I need to get through security. I need to find my gate. I need to get something to eat. Maybe I'll use the restroom before I get on board. And you got to do all that, on a good day within 2 hours. Sometimes it's 3 hours. So the messaging has to be very specific to what the issue is because they are so focused on wanting to get on that plane and having to leave. Great example, several years ago when FEMA did the iPause test and they activated all the phones at once. I had the opportunity to go up to our mezzanine level in our main atrium at the exact time that was going on, and I recorded it. And you can hear the audio of all of the phones going off with the alert messaging for the test messaging. And you see in the video, some people will stop and look at their phone and say, "Oh, okay, well, I'm familiar with this." And other people's, they're not even skipping a beat; they're going right to their gate. It's complete audio, and it's very distinct sound. But other people are just again so focused on going where they need to go. We have to be very specific, and it's a challenge for us at times to get that messaging out to make sure it is appropriate for what we want to do.
Sure. I mean, again, constant messaging. I remember this really funny experience in I think it was St. Louis Airport. I was waiting at my gate, and this lady came up to me and she says, "Hey, can you watch my bag? I need to go to the bathroom." I said, "No, I don't think it's a good idea to ask random people to watch your bag." And she was like, "You're so rude." I'm like, and then the message played, and I was like, "It's literally the first thing they tell you is don't watch a stranger's bag." Anyway, she got all mad. She went to the bathroom with her carry-on, which totally fine. She came back and she was on the phone and she was like, "There's this guy, he refused to watch my bag." Meanwhile, the message is playing again in the background. And I'm like, "Guys, it's like 101 stuff. Like, are you like how much can you possibly do?" We had a problem also in DC of exit signs. We were asking the PhDs who worked in our offices, it was a hospital system, of where all the exits were. And like we would literally take them out into like the cubicle area and just say, point to where you think the exits are. And they missed like more than half the time. They didn't know where the exits were. And it's just like it just made me wonder of like how much more can we do? Right? Where is the point of like, okay, this is enough. If I could put it right in somebody's face, but it's gonna bother you. Like, where do you find for yourself the optimal amount of messaging or support?
I think less is more, and I know that's kind of an ironic statement to make, but people are focused. They want to go where they need to go. It's a very unique challenge at Charlotte, but also other airports. When I have to go to the terminal for meetings and everything else, and obviously I'm wearing my badge, I get stopped multiple times before I can even get to my meeting, people needing directions and just to get to their gate. And signage on an everyday basis at the airport is very, very good. It's systematically laid out, A through E concourses, and then you have your numbered gates through there. But people who are not familiar with the airport or just in that mindset of, all right, there's somebody with a badge, they can help me. A lot of people don't take it on their own to try and figure it out. They want the quick, easy help, which is fine. That's what we're there for. Customer service 101. We're happy to do that. And there have been times where I actually will physically walk people to their gates and just have a conversation with them just because it's Charlotte, it's the South, we want to be hospitable. And I'm happy to do that. But that's why the messaging has to be targeted and very specific. So we don't pull that lever right away. For that messaging, we want to make sure we have eyes on whatever the emergency or the situation is. And then we have a quick convening of the parties that be to make sure that is this the right message? Is this how we're going to do it? And then we implement it. And then not only from a verbal standpoint, but also boots on the ground. We'll make sure that we have staff there that can either translate that message for people or reinforce that message to people as well.
Again, for somebody who's listening in, he just walked through a master class of how to stay calm in an incident. I've seen too many times our friends who are dealing with new incidents who freak out, got to send something out. They don't think about the implication of what they're doing. I'm also a less is more. Bombarding people with messages that don't actually help them, the trust goes down, the capability to message with them is down, and understanding the individual needs of the situation. The fact that you were like, hey, before I send out a message, I actually want to know what's going on, and I want to put multiple systems in place, whether it's people or things or lights and sirens, or sending out a message, whatever that is. You're able to curate something that is actionable for the people who are actually involved, and that is very clever. When you're putting that through, what has been able to give you the confidence to just take a second to breathe and to actually look at the situation instead of you know what I'm talking about, with that person who's like, oh, we just got to do something, and then they end up kind of hurting themselves or the situation. How do you balance that?
I think it's just years of experience. Not only within the emergency management world, but 20 plus years as a volunteer firefighter and EMT. You see a lot of stuff. And to answer your question in a somewhat of a funny way, at time my family would be with me when I would run volunteer calls. Not anymore, but back in the day. And I'd have my gear with me and I'd put it on, and you'd have fire through the roof or a significant incident. And I was very slow and systematic of getting my gear on, doing what I needed to do, grabbing the equipment off the truck, and so on and so forth. And my wife would always tease me, Suze, why are you so slow? There's a fire or whatever the case may be. I said, you have to look at the entire situation. You can't put those blinders on and just go right to the emergency. You have to look at everything that's going on around you. And it becomes somewhat of a family joke in that, I'm just very slow and methodical at times. But I think in our world and our line of business, you kind of have to be. Yes, you want to handle the incident as quickly and efficiently as possible, but you got to look at the other factors that are there. What else do you not see or do you not hear that are going to implement what you're going to try and do? Another great example is we had a fire in our main atrium several years ago, right in the middle, and that's where all of the gates connect. And it was during a push with the airlines where they have to get planes off the gate because new ones are in the air getting ready to land. And we were at that critical point of what do we need to do and how do we need to do it? So fortunately, Charlotte Fire Department, as always, did a great job, knocked down the fire. But we had a quick conversation with them and the incident commander say, hey, can we open up the atrium so passengers can get through where they need to go? They're like, yep, we'll do it. A little bit of smoke removal, move the hose lines a little bit closer to where the fire is, and then we just under escort and make security and our other terminal operations staff making sure people can transverse that area without a problem. So in the airport environment, like I mentioned earlier, we got to keep the operation going, and that requires conversations.
Question. It's kind of a silly question. For someone who actually works at an airport, what are the tips and tricks for people you're like, wow, how do you miss that every time? What are some of the two or three things that you're like, everybody should be doing this and nobody's doing that just kind of drive you crazy? Do you have a couple of those things?
First, yeah, absolutely. Get TSA pre-check. That will. I look in our lobby, and sometimes people are, standing in long lines, and that is what it is. That's the nature of our business. But then you look at the TSA pre-check line, and there's nobody there. So it's worth a little bit of money on the front end to be able to get to your gate on the back end. Prepare. Make sure you have your game plan, whether it's an airport you're very familiar with or one that you've never been to before. Know where you're going. Make sure you know where the gates are, where baggage claim is. Just the a lot of the common sense stuff that I think I take for granted because I work here. But you just want to be know your surroundings. That's basically what it comes down to.
If I could give any advice to any kind of airport emergency manager, yourself included, and any other of my friends who are listening right now, the only message that I wish that airports would play is look up. Just like a random person in different voices too. You could do it in, British accent, American accent, different languages. just telling people randomly, just look up. And that would confuse people so much. But the amount of people who have run into me in an airport, and I travel all the time, just because they're looking at their phones, and I had to dodge them at the last second. It's like, please just look up. Just look up when you're traveling, But yeah,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's just self awareness of knowing where you are, and I can't tell you the number of times we respond to medical incidents in the airport where people trip and fall over their luggage, or where they trip and fall over a travelator, which the travelator is like an escalator, but it's just completely horizontal, and they're just not watching where they're going and where they need to step. And again, it's about situational awareness, just knowing where you are and how to get to where you want to go.
know you are and where you want to get to go. That is a great tagline for an airport. So good job. You just millions of dollars for there.
Perfect.
Hey, Michael, again, thank you so much for coming on, talking about Charlotte, for talking about your experience. And honestly, if you're talking about elder statesman, you've earned the title for sure. And it's honestly a real pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Great being here, and look forward to the next opportunity.
All right, everybody. If you got something out of this, which you should have, you got to give us that 5-star rating. Subscribe. Obviously, we got to say that every time. But if there's something about aviation or airports that you have a question for Michael on, you can send us an email at contact@thereadinesslab.com. We'll forward that on to him. Or if you've done something that is really great for the field, or you have an idea for the field, put it into social media, put it into the chat, let everybody see it and comment on it. Do that a whole emergency management approach, coordinate and collaborate with everybody. And especially if you're traveling, look up, be safe, be aware of your surroundings, follow Michael's advice, and be one of the good ones. And we'll take it from there. See you for the next one. Peace.